Services Financial Assistance Grant Subcommittee meeting of March 17th, 2022. I don't think we need a roll call. Both members are here, the mayor, myself, and Deborah Penrose, our vice.
This is sign the ticket.
So we can start with item B, mid-year update of 2021-2022 grant program.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Victor will be covering a lot of this today. He'll be sharing his screen and sharing that presentation. And then I think it makes sense when he's done with that, we should stop. If there's any take public comment just on the updates, allow you to have a discussion or ask questions before we move on to the next item.
All right, I'll take it from here.
598.
Can everyone see my screen fine? Great. Well, good afternoon. Mayor Ruddick and Vice Mayor Penrose. Happy to be here today to provide an update on the Community Services Financial Assistance Grant Program. And I will start by providing a bit of background. So as you all know, the CSFA grant program is in its fifth year. We'll be going to its fifth year. It first started in fiscal year 2018-2019, I believe. And it is a program that was established to help support local nonprofit organizations serving Half Moon Bay residents. For fiscal year 2021-22, the city took a hybrid approach in funding by providing $200,000 to 7 nonprofits for COVID-19 relief and recovery services, and an additional $50,000 to 10 other organizations for general community serving project programs, for a total of 19 grants to 17 organizations, because some organizations receive multiple grants for different projects. As part of the funding agreements, each grant recipient is required to and has submitted a mid-year report to provide program updates at the halfway point of the funding cycle. And we're happy to report that at the mid-year, the large majority of the 17 funded organizations report that they are on track to meet their goals by the end of the fiscal year. And the few organizations that have not yet completed at least 50% of their stated goals have detailed steps that they will take to ensure that they achieve their goals in time by the end of the fiscal year. And I wanted to provide some mid-year highlights, key learnings and challenges that we took from the reports. Highlights include that several organizations were able to continue and in some cases increase their delivery capacity for essential services. And also, as part of the application process last year, we did ask organizations to talk about ways that they will collaborate, and we did see that quite a bit in the reports. Most notably, from the Community Resilience Hub, which is spearheaded by the Career Education Foundation, along with ALAS and the Boys and Girls Club of the Coast Side. They've really taken on a very collaborative approach in this project, which has yielded opportunities for grants that they've applied for. Specifically, they noted a $50,000 grant that they applied for and received from the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So that's always great to see. Key learnings and challenges. The majority of the funded organizations noted that the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic continue to provide challenges to organizational operations as well as clients' financial and mental and emotional well-being. And these challenges include difficulties in providing certain services, an increased need for food and financial assistance, and increased mental health issues as a result of ongoing hardships. Some examples of this, the Coastal Adult Day Health Center noted challenges in providing safe services to high-risk clients. Most of their clients are high risk as they are seniors, and many of the services they provide include close contact and sometimes unmasked services, help with bathroom assistance, assistance with mealtime. So it's a difficult balance, they noted, in providing a high level of quality services while also maintaining an element of safety. And ALAS noted that they have seen a significant increase in calls for mental health services and have had to be flexible in how they provide those services while also increasing the capacity. And now I will pass it over to Karen Decker to provide an update on crossover and collaboration between the Coastside Recovery Initiative and CSFA.
Victor, I think let's see if there's any questions or discussion on this topic before we move on to the next one.
Okay.
None from the vice. Okay.
And we'll be happy to go back at the end of the. We'll be happy to go back at the end of the presentation to answer any questions that may come up. Karen?
Thank you, Victor. Hi, Mayor Ruddick, and hi, Vice Mayor Penrose. It's really nice to see you in this context, and thank you for inviting me to this, my first CSFA subcommittee meeting. It's nice to be in this smaller forum and be able to share a different angle of the Coastside Recovery Initiative. So I was really delighted to be invited, and it felt like a natural fit for a couple of reasons. I hope that the information that we learned out of the planning phase of the Coastside Recovery Initiative will help inform this round of CSFA funding. And I also see going the other way that this is also a really great opportunity to align efforts and support CRY implementation. So first off, there seemed to be a natural overlap with CRY and CSFA, one around this principle of equity. And I know we've talked about this in prior CRY presentations. I think that for CSFA, it's reflected in funding priorities and in being a flexible grantor with the understanding that our nonprofits are already heavily burdened with many challenges. That was, I think, true even prior to COVID, and they've certainly just been exacerbated. And then for CRY, being mindful about what we mean when we say building the next economy that works for everyone has really influenced the work and the process, and there's a lot of evidence of that. In regards to what we've learned and what you'll see evidenced in a lot of this report, we heard through focus groups and subject matter interviews and a lot of Team Thrive in particular conversations, work adjacent issues like housing evictions and families doubling up and tripling up and being really unclear as to what their rights are as renters. We heard a lot about food insecurity, and this matched a lot of the data that we were able to glean from our county, where we saw significant jumps in food stamps and our profits, our nonprofits increasing food distribution. We saw big referrals to mental health. And I think that what was especially cruel about COVID was that a lot of communities that were already vulnerable and were already isolated, that was just exacerbated by how lonely COVID was and the number that that did on people's anxiety and depression. I know I have young children, and being out of school for 1.5 years took its toll on the whole family. And I continue to hear about a lot of children who are still struggling to come out of that. And then I talked to, senior advocates and folk who really do a deep dive on a regular basis working with seniors who in their own right, in general, have issues around isolation. And that was just such a cruel reality that played out throughout COVID, and I think still continues to. We also heard a lot about struggle with really well-intentioned federal programs, state-funded programs that were designed to help the hard to reach. But oftentimes our nonprofits found that that very connection was very difficult. And I think that that is attributed to many different factors, but those public benefit programs fell short in some ways that I think could be better addressed if we do a deep dive. I think the funding is well-intentioned, but oftentimes, and I saw this a little bit with our ADA application, it is rushed because the aid is intended to reach the most vulnerable, and our nonprofits talked about their struggle in making that happen. And some of that had to do with some paralegal assistance, but not access to attorneys and their staff having to pivot at almost like a whiplash speed because the skills that a lot of our nonprofits hired for shifted during COVID. And they didn't have a lot of time to prepare for that, recruit for that, train their staff accordingly, because they're so busy reacting to the community issues in real time. So heard a lot of that. And then we know that our nonprofits need certain capacities to deliver results, and they struggle with things that often take a back burner because you're so busy with day-to-day operations. So some examples that come to my mind are things like marketing or technology or communications or supporting their staff with growing those skill sets that I just mentioned. They're also competing with a lot of nonprofits over the hill that may offer more competitive salaries. And unless you already live on the coast, we are a bit geographically isolated. So they mentioned some of the hiring issues that I think a lot of our service sector employers are seeing as well. Next slide, please. So out of the Coastside Recovery Initiative, I mean, with economic development and recovery, there's so many ways you could go about that. And we saw in our open house, a lot of great ideas rush to the forefront. And we whittled those down to 4 working teams. And Team Thrive really kind of had double duty in the sense that they focused on our local businesses on par with our nonprofits, because nonprofits were elevated to such a high degree of importance that it merited its own working team. How are we going to get to the next economy? How are we going to do that in an equitable way if we don't get our arms around addressing some of these very glaring disparities within our community? And so these aren't all the recommendations. These are just 2 from Team Thrive, but the 2 that I felt were most relevant to this discussion are here for your consideration. The first one is develop a more coordinated and integrated approach to providing safety net services for vulnerable individuals and families. And the nonprofits that we spoke to that kind of helped form this recommendation talked a lot about how they, from the vantage point of their caseload and their clients, know that individual, know that family very well. But within one family, there could be multiple touch points that could benefit from services. So within one household, you could have a Cabrillo Unified student who's struggling with mental health. There may be unemployment issues within the family. It could be living with extended family like grandparents who could benefit from senior services, et cetera. Very much like how we've recently been talking about the CARES program, right? So you might be coming to respond to the one individual that appears like they're in crisis, but once you get there and you get to meet the caregiver and you get to meet the rest of the family, there's a whole story there. So how, as non-overburdened, very busy nonprofits on the coast, how can we have a more coordinated and integrated approach in terms of serving families so they're not constantly doing different intakes and assessments and repeating their story and building rapport and all of that time, but also if we could get our arms around this, then our nonprofits would have better access to data, right? Because they would have a more comprehensive picture. So when they're trying to make a numbers argument for applying for funding, how lovely to be able to tap into a whole network as opposed to just what their nonprofit is tracking. And again, coming from nonprofits myself, sometimes you're so busy just getting the operations afloat that, you know, extensive and you know, sophisticated program evaluation sometimes falls to the wayside. And then the second recommendation is increase and strengthen capacity of providers to connect vulnerable residents to rental, financial, and other public assistance benefits, which I kind of explained in the other slide, and I think comes to no surprise to this council based on what you're currently funding. I think the first bullet in the context of CSFA speaks a bit to how the funding may be administered from a grants management perspective. And the second one speaks more in terms of identifying funding priorities. So I'm not sure if that's clear. In the first one, when we say develop a more coordinated and integrated approach, there's different ways to incentivize our applicants to do that, right? So if we're stating up front that this is a value of ours, and we would like to encourage applicants to approach these really difficult systemic issues in a collaborative way, in an integrated way, we could incentivize that by weighing the scoring criteria that way. We could incentivize that by devising a performance measure that captures that. You know, if we're interested in that, I think there are a few ideas on the table, and we'll get to a few of them later, that could help kind of create a framework for that if it's of interest. Is there one more slide for Crier? I think I might turn it back to you, Victor.
That was it for your slides, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll take it from here. Thank you, Karen.
Oh, thank you.
And were there any questions on the specific portion of the presentation? Mayor Ruddick?
Yeah, so you probably have already considered this, maybe not, but it seems to me that if you have, I'm addressing a bullet number 1. If you had like a single point of intake, you know, so that they're being taken in one sort of system, but that system is distributing them to the appropriate, you know, nonprofit or caregiver.
Right.
Is that kind of one of the things you were talking about when you talked about coordinated integration? Was like,
I have seen that done before. Sometimes that takes the form of like, say, a gateway, right? Where there's kind of like one point of entry, and then there's almost like a triage where you identify different services, and there's awareness in real time of who is offering what, and you're in constant communication, you talk regularly, you have shared agreements to share information, you streamline that documentation so it's not burdensome to the family or to the individual. I think another approach could be incentivizing, probably with a larger funding amount, a lead agency. We can sometimes call that, who is in a good position to take that on. And, you know, maybe part of that cost, you know, it covers their overhead and some of the administration. But it can also, I think if we have the right partners around the table, they could tap into other resources, say even over the hill, and bring in legal expertise to nonprofits who can't afford to independently hire, you know, legal counsel for their clients. Or maybe it's, you know, contracting or subcontracting with a provider who can bring a shared housing model capacity to the coast side, where it's been, you know, tried in other parts of the county. Just kind of thinking a little bit differently. And, you know, we have kind of our tried and true go-to nonprofits who are so good at providing these safety net services, but they are burdened. And you know, our challenges are great, and I am realistic about the amount of funding that we have. And I think that, you know, there may be some value to perhaps larger amounts and fewer grantees. I know that comes with its own downside, but I think it depends on, you know, what kind of impact we want to make, and do we want to be a part in facilitating how that grant making is administered in more of a hands-on way. You know, a downside to that is we don't want to be burdensome. We don't want to have a lot of, you know, regulation and make this hard to apply for or make this hard to be successful with. So I think it's a balance. I think it's a fascinating conversation.
I think it is too. And I think there's, you know, maybe, you know, a role for the city funds to facilitate that coordination and integration. You know, I think that's what Boys and Girls Club and ALAS and CEF are trying to do, right? A single point of contact for, you know, students and families to get into the system and understand all the resources available. So I really think that you've nailed it in terms of kind of what's needed. That yeah, it is an interesting conversation about how to do it and how to fund it. But you know, treating like the whole person, the whole family. You know, I think we need to deal at a family level, frankly. You know, I think it's an exciting conversation. So thanks for Cry's work on that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And Vice Mayor Penrose. Oh, and you're on mute.
I would agree with Debbie in what she said. This is great. This is what's come out of Team Thrive is exactly the kind of information we need and the suggestions that we need in order to be effective. I'm wondering what other cities do in terms of their social services. This is a social service. Is there are there employees on staff who head up departments of social services, for instance? And I think looking at what other cities have done might, be a way to get us help us get started. I think it is a long-term conversation. I don't think this is something we're going to solve overnight, but I do like the idea of a central agency of some sort as a gateway. And I think that helps us not duplicate our efforts. And it also helps us to prioritize better the needs that we have. So I don't know what your thinking on that is, but I'd like to see what other cities have done.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Karen.
actually, I was going to defer to you just because I know a lot of the core service providers are funded by the county. They have an entire Health and Human Services Department or agency. And, the amount of funding that they have at their disposal is so, has the capacity to be so impactful. I'm not aware of individual cities really taking a lead. I know when I was at Asian American Recovery Services and Healthcare 360, the vast majority of our funding would come from the county. And then we would have smaller city grants, like say the Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force in San Jose was one of our funders. That would be to the tune of say, $15,000, $30,000. And, if I'm going to be totally honest, just overseeing the grants in Santa Clara County, it was often hard to justify having the smaller programs, especially when there were extensive reporting requirements. And I remember lamenting to a coworker that, we were providing really acute substance abuse and mental health treatment for youth and their families. And a fellow grantee at the table was doing midnight basketball, right? And that's not to say that midnight basketball isn't lovely and is its own form of social recreation and exercise and physical health. But sometimes the amount of agencies and programs that the city that I used to be in wanted to fund, it didn't make much of an impact, but it was it was more quantity than quality. And as a nonprofit, that could be frustrating at times. And so, we would often pursue the county grants because they were just so well subsidized, right? And when it packs a bigger punch, then you're looking, okay, how many FTE could I have? What legal resources can I bring in? Which satellite sites can we open? How, it really gets you, there are a lot of possibilities. But Matthew, did you want to answer in terms of city versus county and what might be feasible for our price point?
Yeah, well, and I think, I think the Vice Mayor brings up a good point. There probably are good models out there. In the 5 years that I've been working with our nonprofits here with the city, I've certainly seen the collaboration and coordination increase 100-fold among the nonprofits and then with us as a city in our relationship to them. And that's been really great. I think what we're talking about here is the next step. The collaboration is there, the teamwork, camaraderie, the sharing of information informally is there. But when someone comes in and needs help, that information may not always be up to date. You may not know what's happening in another nonprofit. And I think it's the next level of shared information and possibly this single point of intake, or at least an agency that is more focused on connection to services as opposed to service delivery themselves. The one example I can think of, and Victor knows a little bit about this, is in Redwood City. The city of Redwood City runs a community center that borders North Fair Oaks, which is unincorporated. And Victor, are they a core service agency? Do you know?
They are the core for that area.
They are the core.
Yeah.
So they're actually funded by the county as the core. And I think to some degree do act as that lead nonprofit agency in that area, that if somebody has a need, they go straight to, I can't even remember the name of the organization, but they're an organization that's also a department of the city. It's a really interesting model. Very well respected. Terry Chin is the woman that runs it, and she is highly respected among all the nonprofits. So I think that's something that, we could look at and try to understand better and see if there's a way to replicate that. We, of course, have 2 core service agencies on the coast, which is, I think, part of the complication. You've got Coastside Hope in the mid-coast, and then you've got Puente for the south coast. And, they are among this great network of nonprofits that work together. But I'm not sure any of the other nonprofits see them as a lead that they look to. They're just another nonprofit that they coordinate with. And so there may be an opportunity to find, as you mentioned, Mayor Ruddick, a lead agency that, again, is focused on understanding and coordinating and less about themselves delivering services and getting them to the right folks. So I think it's certainly something we should explore before we finalize the recommendations and get these grants out on the table.
Sorry.
Yeah, so, it's likely that, people might get into the system via the organizations that they're most familiar with or that are close to home. But, the organization could certainly interact with this intake system. And, this intake system might not have to be like an agency. It could maybe be like 1 or 2 staff people, and mostly done online or virtual, who confirms, who looks at the need and can make, bigger recommendations if necessary. Like, you should stay with Puente, but you also would benefit from working with a loss, because of, family connections or your work or whatever. But you might be able to do it relatively cost effectively if it weren't like a separate agency, but maybe some staff function someplace, with, good online connectivity, to just like be a gateway, a coordinator, and like you said, not deliver the service themselves, just, a point of contact that acts as like a referee almost. Yes, you need this, but I'm guessing because of your family situation, you could benefit from this, this, and this, or yeah. So I think we might look at cost-effective ways of actually doing that function. Worth piloting, maybe, I don't know.
Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, but the county actually already has a system for intake. But I think it's mostly available to the cores or other county-funded organizations, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. This has come up in our work to launch the CARES program. There is for all the mental health providers that receive funding from San Mateo County, they all are on a shared system. But depending on their role, they only have access to certain information. It's not comprehensive. And if you're not an agency that's getting funding from the county for that specific purpose, you don't have access to that information. I think the coordinated entry system that is, I think, actually statewide, but the information I don't think is shared statewide. Anybody in San Mateo County that wants to access homeless services has to go through coordinated entry first. And that there's several Life Moves can do the intake. Can Coastside Hope do the intake, Victor?
I think it's just Coastside Hope on the, yeah.
And if you're in San Mateo, you can go to Samaritan House. And again, that's shared information, but again, only among specific providers. I think what we're looking for is a similar approach that's broader, that allows that sharing of information across all types of service providers, so that if a person goes to, gets into coordinated entry for homeless services, and then works with, a service to get childcare assistance, they both know what's going on and can maybe put their heads together to offer more comprehensive services to the family. Well, this is really helpful. And I think when we get to the recommendations section, we can talk a little bit about how we can include this in our approach. I think where we landed as staff looking at the relationship between the Recovery Initiative and CSFA is a great program. And it's, Victor's done an incredible job over the last several years of really building it up into something that is really helpful for our nonprofits. I think the process is good for the council to be involved in the decision-making. And ultimately, our nonprofits really look forward to this process each year. And so we didn't see the recovery initiative changing that. We see this opportunity to overlay these recommendations into the process so that there's a linkage between them as it applies to the appropriate recommendations. And so I think when we get to the recommendations piece, we can talk about how these two recommendations can overlay it within our scoring criteria or our areas of priority or how we evaluate the work that they're doing as performance measures. So I think, any other questions about these two recommendations? Or are we ready to move into the kind of recommended approach to CSFA for the coming year?
Go for it.
Okay, it's Victor again.
All right, so for fiscal year 2022-2023, staff is recommending a continuation of the CSFA grant program at a funding amount of at least $250,000, which is what was funded in this current fiscal year. And we did hear from the subcommittee at the last meeting that due to continued impacts of COVID-19 and any associated economic and mental health effects, we are recommending a continuation of the $200,000 in funding that would be prioritized specifically for organizations and programs providing COVID-19 relief and support services. And some of the recommended areas that you see here are partially informed by the Coast of Recovery Initiative. So that includes services related to basic needs such as food, shelter, clothing, and other safety net services, services related to housing and security such as rent relief and renters' rights assistance, and mental health and wellness services such as individual and family counseling and case management. That is all similar to what we funded in fiscal year 21-22, but enhanced and expanded on due to CRY. And additionally, staff also recommends another $50,000 be allocated for more general community serving projects and programs. But again, based on the Coast of Recovery Initiative findings, instead of opening it up broadly to every sort of program, staff is recommending some priority areas that the city might consider, which include shared housing program capacity, culturally competent and language accessible outreach services to help combat misinformation and to link the hard to reach with program eligibility, workforce development and reskilling, and efforts to increase collaboration, coordination, and capacity building among nonprofits, as mentioned by Karen. That is the recommendation for this upcoming fiscal year. And
What do you mean shared housing?
Shared housing. So one program in specific comes to mind is HIP housing. They do shared housing. So I think that's typically someone who either has a home that they rent or own and submit an application for a roommate basically to share the cost of that housing. Matthew, that's correct, right?
That's correct. And HIP, they act as a screener, a connector. They're really, they take a lot of the fear that comes with sharing housing away. And I think our thinking around this was, HIP housing is great. We get a list of available shared housing opportunities every month, but it's a countywide program. And maybe there's an opportunity to really do a coast-side focused one. We just know we're in a unique region that often needs that extra focus. The recovery initiative is a perfect example. The county had a great recovery initiative, but we knew we needed to do our own locally because our needs are just a little different. And so that might be an opportunity. It looks like the Vice Mayor's got a question.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, it's about the shared housing program capacity and HIP housing. What I have noticed with HIP housing is that there are very few rooms available in Half Moon Bay. The ones that are on the coast are not in Half Moon Bay, and there aren't that many on the coast. And I'm wondering if we have information on how successful HIP housing has been here on the coast for one thing, and also in Half Moon Bay. So, you know, I think trying to work with them, we have tried. I know you guys have been working with them and trying to get them to focus here, but for one reason or another, it has not been a successful program as far as I can see for our residents. So maybe we shouldn't be looking at HIP housing. Maybe we should be looking at a different program that we develop or that somebody develops here on the coast.
Yeah, and the other problem is COVID. So, you know, an older, you know, single woman who might have a bedroom or two, you know, maybe more vulnerable, owns the house, maybe more vulnerable to COVID, might be reluctant to share a home that doesn't have like separate entrance or something. In knowing that this person has family members and maybe not everybody's completely protected. I think COVID kind of blunts or can blunt the success of, you know, that concept.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is a perfect example of where collaboration and partnerships could really leverage any funding, because we're not going to have enough funding probably to convince HIP housing to create a focused program on the coast side, nor do we probably have the funding to start our own. But we might be able to fund a local nonprofit that has the local connections and trust to partner with HIP housing to do the legwork, but they get to utilize the HIP housing infrastructure and expertise to, you know, there's the economies of scale for the coast side because and then you've got the local trust. We have no idea if somebody's going to be interested in doing this, but these are the more focused type thoughts we were having, as opposed to just opening up the 50,000 to any nonprofit. You know, I think a good example from last year is the Veterans Fishing Program. It's a great program. I'm sure it brought a lot of benefit, but the impact on our community was probably very, very small. Housing has such huge impacts on our community. At least listing some of our thoughts to get people thinking about, okay, here's where the city's headed with this. So that was our thinking around those recommendations. And then we do, along with this, and I think before we open it up to just full on deliberation and kind of honing in on what next year looks like, we had a few recommendations. Victor, if you don't mind jumping to the final slide on the overall process. We had a great opportunity this year to involve Karen, as well as our consultant under the Recovery Initiative, Erica Wood. And I think you know that Karen has a long and extensive nonprofit background with Asian American Recovery Services, which became Health Rights 360. And then Erica has a long career with the community, you know, Silicon Valley Community Foundation and other nonprofits, both of whom have received grants and issued grants, have administered grants. They just have a perspective that we don't normally have internally. And so they took some time to just look at the program, to think about ways to dial it in more, make it more friendly to our nonprofits. And I think we've got a pretty good list of ways that we could make improvements this year. And so the first is, we've talked about it a lot, is just really finding ways to incentivize the collaboration. Our grants are small, our funding allocation is small in the big picture, but when folks work together, there's big impact. A good example from this past year was we gave $5,000 to ALAS and $5,000 to Coastside CERTS to work together to administer additional work around Ballistos, which is a program, which is a version of CERT that's focused on Spanish-speaking Latinx population. And you know, CERT has the expertise on the content. ALAS has the trust and the community engagement. And together, I believe they accomplished a lot more than either of them would have done on their own. And I think we want to keep incentivizing those types of partnerships. So we can do that by making it a condition of the funding. And maybe that's part of it is for a certain number of grants or all of them, we require leverage and collaboration for every dollar that we give. We may not want to do that, but I think it's worth talking about. It could just be prioritized in our scoring of the applications, or it could be just in the performance measure that, hey, if you want to continue to get funding from us, you need to show us that you're working collaboratively and effectively collaboratively, not just communicating or going to meetings, but actually using these funds to leverage and really make this money go as far as possible by working with our community partners. As Karen mentioned earlier, we may consider, we've done a really good job of sharing and funding a lot of different agencies over the last several years. To create higher impact, we may want to focus on larger grants to fewer organizations. And, there's a give and take there, right? To some small agencies, a $5,000 grant from us could be really meaningful and helpful to them. But we know we have some agencies that are dealing with some significant needs. And a $30,000 grant is great. A $50,000 grant might mean the difference between really expanding a program or not. And then one of the things that came from both Karen and Erica is the idea of once we have a list of who we believe we're going to fund, looking for linkages where we can create learning cohorts and make that a condition of the grant, is that at points during the year, they get together and they talk about their programs, they talk about what's going well, and they talk about, we kind of force them to talk about working together. And this is becoming very common, and I think it's really effective. It's a way for us to gather feedback and see the progress of the grants, but it also allows them to work together to learn and to do more. So that's another, I think, really important recommendation. And the flip side of that is continuing to make this process as easy as possible for our agencies. Big grants typically come with really extensive application requirements, reporting requirements. And sometimes that's really appropriate because there's risk involved in not tracking closely these funds. But I think we have pretty strong relationships with a lot of the folks that we fund and a lot of insight into the work that they're doing. And for the size of our grants, burdensome application and reporting requirements might make it not worth their while. And so what we're recommending is maybe only doing one report per year, maybe the mid-year, because that helps us develop our plans for the next year. Our year-end report is typically not something we look closely at except for the financials for auditing purposes. So really what we would work with the finance department, with Ken, our finance manager, on limiting what we ask for, especially to ongoing fundees, to what we need for auditing purposes. And for new fundees, we make those requirements a little more intensive until we build that relationship trust. These are just things we'd like to talk about and think about as we look at the upcoming process. You've heard a lot from us. I think at this point, we're ready to turn the time over to you as the subcommittee to really help us figure out what the next year is going to look like. Victor's got the calendar that we can talk about at the end, but we've got a good timeline that we're on, and I think could be, we'll be in a good spot to get these finalized and get folks funded as soon as the budget is available in July.
Vice Mayor, would you like to start?
Yeah. My first thought is let's increase the funding. And that is usually what I say, so it's no surprise. But I'm thinking if we could do two things. One is fund the coordinating effort that we're talking about. Put some money aside, and I don't know exactly how it would be used or who would use it, but to investigate a more comprehensive, coordinated giving. And the second would be to increase our regular funding from the 250,000 to 300,000. That's, numbers are numbers right now. And I don't know what our budget is going to be, and I don't know how it's going to look, but my thinking is it's not a lot of money we're giving out. It may seem like a lot when it's, all combined, but people getting $30,000 is not a lot of money to run an organization like Coastside Hope, for instance. I don't remember what they got. I don't have that spreadsheet, so I can't say, but.
You know it well. It's 30,000.
Yeah, those are my thoughts. If we could give Coastside Hope 100,000 and not give, the veterans fishermen anything, I'd be happy with that. That's kind of my thinking. I do think reducing the number of overall organizations that we give to makes more sense. That being said, maybe the work that we do not fund gets absorbed by some of the organizations that we do fund. So there's a lot to look at, and those are my just off the cuff thoughts. Debbie?
Yeah, I'd like to identify our core, human services agencies and give them each $50,000. Maybe it's 6. Say, who are they? It would be Senior Coastsiders, Coastside Hope, ALAS. I don't know how much of our population Puente serves, but if we could give our core service agencies that serve our residents 50,000 each, and whether that's 300 or 350,000, I'm not sure. But I see a lot of hurt coming, more suffering than we've had before, because a lot of the federal aid is going away, and not only that, what money's been allocated, a lot of it hasn't been distributed because of these, the Republicans have, waged war on the poor and have, levied all these restrictions and requirements on the money that has been allocated, right? So I think, rent problems, I'm really concerned about food. I don't know if the city could leverage its bulk buying power on its own, like allow some agency or do it itself to acquire staples, like rice, flour, all that stuff. But I'm very concerned about food security, and I'm very concerned about rental assistance. But I agree with Deborah. I think they need 50,000 apiece. And I wouldn't worry too much about the smaller organizations. I think we build this as a pilot. We describe it as a critical need right now, given all these, basic life foundation, needs that are going on for people. So more money, fewer organizations, but I would say minimum $50,000 a piece to really make a difference. And I wouldn't make collaboration a condition for funding, but I certainly would, if we're doing 6, we probably don't have to score it, your collaboration, but certainly a performance metric. And I think, having people have to get together and talk, and the mid-year report, should involve some coaching, on the part of, the city maybe about the need for collaboration. I think we should talk about it in the grant solicitation. So I kind of agree with your recommended approach, but everybody should get at least $50,000. I don't know what that ends up to. I don't know if we consider some recess a core service agency. Certainly dental work is super important. As somebody whose teeth is her cross to bear in life, the idea that people have to go without dental treatment, just turns my blood cold. So I kind of like that approach. And I think we should build toward, what is a co-side integrated system? Find ways to organize it, fund it, make it start small, because I think small is flexible and fleet. I agree with reporting one report, make it as easy as possible, because we know these organizations, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I think there's great need out there, and I think, there's reason to scale it up. So I don't know if I've left anything out that you need to hear in terms of direction from us. But that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I have another question, and that is, how can we utilize Erica's skills? And should we be considering using Erica to help us with the integrated approach that we're talking about?
I think that's a fantastic idea. She is a gem that we have found, and we're constantly thinking about how to leverage it. And when we brought her into this conversation, it was just because you had requested some update on the recovery initiative, how it relates. And she can't help herself but put her big picture, foundation hat on and say, there are things you could do better. Like, she's just amazing, and lots of credibility, and and she's a co-sider, which is fantastic. Real quick, we've got Crystalline from the chamber who's in the public and has her hand raised. Do we want to give her a chance for some public comment here? Okay,
Absolutely.
Crystalline, let me allow you to speak. You're on the air.
Thank you. Love this conversation. I just wanted to make a note that for the HIP housing, I think their issue on the co-side is primarily a marketing issue. They haven't, to my experience, connected themselves with co-side entities in trying to push out the message. And I know that there's multiple co-side entities that have wanted to help amplify their message. But it's just been a hard road. So I don't know necessarily what the solution to that is exactly, but if there was a way to amplify HIP Housing's message on the coast side better than they do now, I think they would have better results without necessarily having to get another nonprofit fully involved. Our nonprofits are pretty heavily used as it is. And then love the idea of some larger chunks of money for fewer nonprofits. I do think, even just as Mayor Reddick was trying to start to name off, that list grows very quickly depending on what you consider a core service. And love that you said sonrisas, because a lot of people don't realize that when you have a toothache, that can lead to real medical issues and things like that. It really spreads fast.
It could affect your heart.
Yeah, everything. Crazy. So that's a great one. And we have, so many nonprofits per person, per capita. I would venture to guess that for our size community, we might be in the running for most nonprofits per person. Just something to consider, and Erica might have brought this up already too. I don't think it's uncommon, and you might want to consider, as this program grows over the years, having a system where a nonprofit can receive funding, this larger chunk of money one year, but then skips a year and then can come back the year after. Not to say that you want to do that for like senior co-siders or some of the, real cores. But there's lots of nonprofits out there that do good works. And for them, maybe $50,000 can last 2 years. Like the county often does a 2-year cycle. And so that, we know it's for 2 years. And I do want to just make a note to something that positively affected the way that I thought of grant funding in regards to what the city told me when I was asking for funding in 2019. That was my first year doing the ask. You guys had provided funding to the chamber for many, many years, and it ended up getting written into our budget. It was money that we just kind of planned on you guys saying yes for. And I think what that led to was complacency, right? Like it didn't challenge us to do more with that money. So when you all mentioned to us in 2019, our funding, or that ours is in the city, universal hours. But the city's funding should not be written into the nonprofit's budget. Don't expect it. That just, when you come to us with an ask, make sure that that ask is for something innovative, that it is serving a current need. It really just forces us to evaluate what we're doing and making sure that it's the best possible version, so that what we want is for you guys to have an easy yes, that you look at our things and say, that's amazing. We love it. We want to fund it. So that's we're so lucky. Our nonprofits are great. And some nonprofits will not rest on their laurels, but I do think it's in the city's best interest to make sure that there is something written in there that it does just encourage the nonprofits to make sure that they are on the best of their tippy toes.
I totally agree with Crystalline on this. And we had talked about this in past years, actually. We don't want to fund necessarily only like annual recurring costs that have other potential funding sources to address, right? Should be a need where our funding is, fills a unique gap, maybe. Maybe we just introduce this 1 year funding, put a time limit on it and just say, this is not considered, the city is not considering this, well, you know what I'm talking about. But I agree with her point completely.
Yeah, we want to support our nonprofits without them becoming dependent upon our funding, because we've seen things can change very quickly, and we don't want to be in a position where people depend on us and we say, we can't help you this year. And they actually were expecting it for just their general operating expenses. And I think, Crystalline is spot on. We made it clear, when you ask for money, you have to ask for it for something specific, and it's got to be measurable, and it's a one-time thing. And I think as she said, I think our nonprofits get that. But I will share, I had a conversation with one of our nonprofits, and they were honest and said, we get that, but we have come to depend on this. We've been funded many times, and it's become part of our expectation. And they said they get it. We might say no, but that is starting to happen. So I think that's another thing that we'll be thinking about then, is how do we ensure that we're funding the right services and getting the people the help that they need, but not in a way that the nonprofits see it as something they're going to have every year and can expect every year. Next year may be very different, and the needs may be very different, and we may have to fund a completely different set of priorities, and they need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, so we need to know what their development program is. Most grant programs actually require a match. Many grant programs, like state grant programs, in certain situations, we want to see your budget, your nonprofit budget, and that you're, solvent and, things like that. So there's a risk of, too many requirements that slow the process down, but we have to be accountable, and we have to communicate that yes, we're not a social services agency, but we want to help leverage other funds in the community and in the county. So it's a matter of making sure people understand that, and that there might be a year where we can't fund them.
Debbie, what do you think about my suggestion of using Erica to help us do an integrated approach? And if you like the idea, how would we implement that?
Well, I really like your idea. Yeah. And, maybe it's a contract with her, a separate contract, or maybe it's, part of Karen's work program, in a
Well,
conference.
yeah, but Karen's got a lot on her plate though. And that's why I was thinking of Erica, not because I didn't think Karen would be perfect, but we can't ask Karen to do just this.
No, but Karen is a management analyst, a senior management analyst.
Yeah.
Maybe she would manage the contract, right?
Karen, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I will say that when an opportunity arises and my skill set can be helpful, that's always very appealing to me because if it could yield a meaningful outcome, that's a big motivator for just my own morale and engagement. So I'm always happy to help. I will say that I think there's a lot of alignment, like I said in the beginning, with this funding and with the Coastside Recovery Initiative. So I think supporting an integrated approach, fleshing out some of these ideas is very much in line with one of those recommendations, which is the phase that we're in now. We're starting implementation. And so I think that funding a contract that includes the next phase of CRY with some CSFA related, I don't see it as an either or. I see it as a path forward. And I think that it just speaks to that alignment. I know, her current contract, which is due at the end of this month, we're having these conversations already at the city in terms of best use of her time and skill set. I do think that this is a very unique time and place to do something bold, to do something different. And in my career, I haven't come across such wonderful timing, with someone who has her particular skill set, who lives downtown in Half Moon Bay. It's amazing. And for me personally and professionally, the fact that with the CARES program and now CSFA, it's this convergence of nonprofit expertise with civic engagement and local government, it's very unique and very exciting. So I do think that coupled with the work that Victor and Matthew are doing, there's a really good synergy here.
Yeah, so, and I know this is most likely true for Deborah. So it's not just a matter of giving grants to individual organizations to do their thing. For me, and I think others of you share that, but there's a bigger goal here. And the goal is building, at the risk of using nerd language, social cohesion, social strength, social, connections, social capital, whatever you want to call it. But it's strengthening the connectivity among our organizations, our economy, individual citizens and families, because, while I'm a progressive Democrat, I believe that government isn't only the answer. I think government has to act in coordination with social equity and social capital to really create a strong, resilient community. So there's a bigger policy thing here.
I totally agree with that. And there's actually a part in the Coastside Recovery Report under Team Thrive that talks about community connectedness. And I think that's also related to Team Vibrant, creating vibrant commercial and community spaces, make it Main Street. This is all interrelated and interconnected. And when I think about, imagining grant making and asking our grantees to come up with creative collaborations, I dream about, seniors working with youth and students and how beneficial that is to both, for different reasons. Or I think about people who are in retirement and have so much to give and have so much experience, and, a population that is looking for reskilling and apprenticeship opportunities. And it just takes convening, it takes facilitation, it takes someone waking up and thinking about this and getting the right people together and sticking with it. I think that there's a lot of success in other communities. And in my work with the Coastside Recovery Initiative, I think about HIP housing. I think about As Fresh as It Gets. I think about Nova Works. I think about all these great organizations doing good work, and they have these models of success, but we don't see it on the coast side because there's not a designated liaison or project manager waking up every day thinking about this. And I saw that a lot working in Pescadero, right? We're working on a park plaza, and Supervisor Horsley so generously is looking at these two properties. And another recommendation for that community is some staffing capacity, because it's a great idea, but somebody has to own this. Somebody has to do the due diligence with the environmental review and do what it takes to have a construction project like Carter Park go from soup to nuts and actually see that realized. So yes, a lot of challenge.
The Johnson House, you know, I mean, just, yeah. So I agree with Deborah 100% on this. I'd like to see, you know, the team of Karen and Erica do that. You know, we've seen their work. It's been very successful here. You know, Karen dreams about it. I want her to, you know, realize her dreams.
Well, and I think, Mayor, you made a really great point that, you know, we keep going to the recovery initiative, but I think it's a very powerful tool we now have at our disposal. And it's that government convened it. But what we did is we didn't convene a bunch of government people to try to solve problems. We convened the community and the expertise in the community to create ideas of how to solve problems. And we've tried to make it really clear, and I think we're gonna have to continue to make it clear. The recommendations that came out of that are not recommendations for the city to solve all these problems. They are recommendations, they're high level for a reason. And that's because we can't do all the work. We can't do all the solving. It's going to take the private sector. It's going to take nonprofits. It's going to take government. It's going to take passionate individuals. And what we're doing now is shifting to where can we continue to spark that so that it continues forward and gets implemented. So I think it's all coming together pretty nicely. I've got some pretty exciting thoughts coming right now based on this conversation. And
You know,
and I agree
partnership
with you.
is so important, you know.
Yeah. Karen and Erica are a dream team. And I think when we're talking about community services, we can add Victor to that dream team and a lot of great things are going to happen.
Didn't mean to stop Victor. No,
I'm very excited about, I'm very excited about where this could go. So
I have another thought too, and that is there's a group called, and you know them, Coastside Families Taking Action. It might be good to tap into them and say, you know, how can you help us? You know, what do you have to offer? There are a lot of people out there that would like to do something and would like to give, and they have good ideas, they have the ability, they have the time, they have the money, they have the resources that the people in need in our community don't have. We need to get those people actively involved. That's just one group, but you know, they come to mind because I know they're always saying, what can we do to help?
Yep.
There are seniors in Kenyatta Cove who are saying, what can I do to help?
You know, and there is this core, there has been this core, you know, similar to CFTA in Half Moon Bay. So I've lived here over 30 years. And, you know, the Pumpkin Festival was all about, you know, community volunteerism. And, you know, there was a lot of autocratic stuff going on the committee, but, you know, everybody had a piece of the action and could, you know, fund their activities, and people worked together, and people in different issues, you know, spent a lot of time preparing for it and interacting. And, you know, we've kind of lost that because of COVID. But, you know, I think, you know, people love that about Half Moon Bay. And I think we need to, you know, keep that going too, that sense of, like you said, volunteerism and helping. I think people really want to do that, but, you know, COVID's kind of thrown a wrench into it. But yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation, and I do want to make sure we do get back to this year's process to make sure we as staff know where we need to take this, because our next step is to go to the full council with a recommendation from you all. So getting back to the you know, from the 50,000 foot view and going down a little bit specifically to CSFA, what I heard is that at least for 1 year, we would like to change our approach to this and focus on 6 or 7, 5, 6, 7, we'll have to figure out what it is, very core service providing agencies. I want to be careful not to use the term core service agency because that's Coastside Hope. That's an actual like legal term for them. But these agencies that have been providing core services to our community, safety net services, and it sounds like almost rather than an application process, it's what we would do is identify them and say, here's our priorities. Here's what we're looking to see happen this year. Tell us how you're going to meet those needs and how our funding can help you get there and enhance it, or build upon what you've been doing. So it's almost like by invite, we're asking them to submit their approach to our priorities. And then that creates that cohort we talked about. And then there's an opportunity, I think, to have an Erica or some other folk, we bring somebody in that helps guide these folks as a group to take that funding and really maximize its use in the community.
Yeah, so that's a little more of a hands-on approach. Like, I don't know if it's Karen and Victor or Karen and Victor and Matthew, just going to these agencies and inviting them. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth having that personal interaction on this matter. And, maybe one of the first things that happens, after everybody's, lined up is this facilitated meeting, to, talk about these concepts and getting some development going of this approach right out of the gate, so not just shifting off the money, but, keeping our hand in, over the course of the year kind of a thing. I mean, it is more labor intensive, but, I think it's probably worth it if, Bob agrees with it and you guys want to do it.
And that is more or less the approach that we took in 2020, actually, where the council, the subcommittee identified specific needs to help address effects of the pandemic, and specifically identified 7 organizations that were provided funding, and kind of have done that work already, actually. And we've continued funding those 7 organizations at a higher level for the last 2 years. So it's definitely feasible.
And then what I would recommend, based on the conversation we had, and especially about, providing more money to less nonprofits, but also not creating that dependence on us, is I think we do want to be clear that this approach is a pilot. We're going to do that this year. We may go back to what we were doing before next year, or we may do something different next year. This is the CSFA, is not going to always be the same thing every year. It's not just going to go into autopilot. It's something we're really thoughtful about based on the needs of that current year. And we're going to keep doing that. Is that a reasonable?
And collaboration, supports that goal, because, as you build relationships and collaborate, you're reducing your individual costs, hopefully over time, right? Because you're leveraging costs across, the spectrum. So, we're saying like this is, one-time money, but we're hoping to build a network that enables you to do your work, more efficiently and cost effectively, and, produce results. So the collaboration, I think, supports that concept of, this is not to be a regular part of your budget. We're trying to get you all to work together to leverage your funds.
Well, and I think those 2 recommendations from the recovery initiative that Karen put up are the guiding principles behind this new collaboration. The reason we're going to do this, focus our funding and bring these folks together collaboratively, is to try to make movement towards these goals. And so maybe that's part of the cohort meetings is a brainstorm among funded agencies on how can you use this money to move us down this path towards these recommendations.
And it's a tough cultural thing, right? Everybody wants their silo and their money and things. We have to break that. We have to break them of that and try to see the benefits of, partnering and collaboration. And, there'll have to be money conversations, internally in these organizations. Or we just want our 50,000, but I think as conveners, the word came up, convening, and clarifying what the city's goals are, for its money. There may be some who don't want to play, but hopefully everybody wants to play. And
And I
I
think,
can also
go ahead, Karen.
when I think about that, the concept of a cohort emerging, possibly along service lines or geography, however that plays out, I see such unintended ripple effects, not unintended, but lovely ripple effects coming from that may not be as obvious. So, for instance, when I think about the amount of times, Judith or Belinda or Rita are tapped for a statement or a survey or a focus group participant, they're so taxed already. There's such fatigue in that area that perhaps a convening like this could be their next tier or their equivalent of mid-level management, which could really help with their own succession planning, which could really help create this peer support, right? Because these are overtaxed, frankly unappreciated, speaking for my own background, like when we would have a retreat for our social workers or mental health therapists, they were so grateful for anything. Like when our agency would provide lunch, they're not used to a lot of perks. They don't. And so I think that when you're so busy and you have such exhaustive caseloads, it's hard to kind of make the time to reach out, find common ground, troubleshoot around challenges. And sometimes funding kind of forces that, right? Because it's a requirement. So I hope it's perceived as not a burdensome requirement, but a requirement that is an incentive to, and I think it's appropriate that the city in this funding is the convener, because sometimes you just need that push because you're so busy, you're stretched so thinly.
Mm-hmm.
You're muted, Mayor.
Coaching is important too, because as you said, these organizations are all overtaxed and their executives are overtaxed. You need coaching, you need supportive people.
Well, and I think we have our chamber executive on this call, and she's developing the Small Business Development Center that is not just for for-profit businesses. It's to help support and build capacity in nonprofits. I think she has a role in helping with those convenings as well on the business side and helping them run efficient and in the coaching piece, the business coaching. So we have some really talented people at our disposal right now. It's pretty amazing. The last thing I'll share on this is I think, there's the part of me that thinks this is amazing, but there are all those other nonprofits that are going to be like, we don't get to apply this year. I think one of the other goals maybe for us with this pilot is this is the core group to start this, but it's got to be done in a way that it sets the model to capture all of our nonprofits, right? You can't create an integrated approach of all of our nonprofits all at once. I don't think that's really feasible. But if we can prove it with 5 or 6 really strong nonprofits, it'll be easier to bring in the smaller nonprofits along the way. So they will have a piece of this at some point. But this year, our focus is going to be on these core providers.
I wonder if we should also not ignore the smaller organizations who may be asking for grants, right? And I don't want to cut them out completely. And I wish I had the list in front of me so I could look at it. But I think very small grants given to organizations that aren't that large or don't have that big a need, with the caveat that they have to become part of the community. They have to be part of the larger nonprofit community. Might be a way to approach helping them and also encouraging them, to participate in a way that's more meaningful. I think of someone like Sea Huggers, and they do good work. They are providing a wonderful service in terms of our sustainability and our tourism industry. And I hate to cut them out completely, is what I'm saying. And I'd like to have us figure out a way to include them and task them with becoming more integrated with the rest of the nonprofit community. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, Sea Huggers Camp wasn't very successful. And part of the reason is, what's going on internally within the organization. They do a lot of good stuff, but not everybody on that list, I would consider at the same level they were funded before.
Right.
I certainly wouldn't give any money to the fishermen. There's other grant programs like Coastal Conservancy has Explore the Coast. I actually sent that to Shell Cleve. So, maybe one thing we could do is just have staff work on the recommendation, the big recommendation, and at the city council say, we don't have funding here for some smaller organizations, and make that a more robust discussion among council, at the council meeting here, if they want to augment. But staff is going to have a lot of work here with this new approach. And so having a large number of small applications to deal with, I don't think is a good idea. Really.
No, I know, but I think there's a compromise someplace in there.
We'll think through some of that. I think maybe there's an opportunity for the smaller folks, find ways to leverage like Coastside Gives, because Coastside Gives has exploded the last couple of years. What used to be, I think, incredibly, they've almost replaced the funding that these nonprofits used to get through the Pumpkin Festival. It was a godsend, right? That in the 2 years that the Pumpkin Festival was canceled and that there was that huge loss of revenue, Coastside Gives filled that in some ways. And maybe there's a way to leverage that to support the smaller organizations. We'll have to think about it and talk about it, but I've got a few thoughts about that maybe we can share when we get to the council meeting.
And, with Sea Hugger too, that could be part of our budget process where we say, one of our budget items is trash pickup on the coast, and that includes our contract with Abundant Grace. And then, Sea Hugger has a slightly, different approach, right? They do organized beach cleanups. So maybe Sea Hugger could be like a budget action, as opposed to like a grant. We can say, we're really interested in funding, beach cleanups and neighborhood trash pickup, and then use the budget process to, give them some funding.
More of a contract for services.
Right.
We set the terms a little bit more.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Anyway, they were the only example that, that I could think of.
Well, there was Hope Services. There was Hope Services and there was El Centro. But I'm guessing like the small amount we gave El Centro, I don't know how big a bang for the buck it was. That was one of the ones I had a hard time reading on the spreadsheet. Certainly, worth discussing at the council level.
Yeah.
Here's some groups have fallen through the cracks on this particular approach. And what do you think?
Karen,
great work.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, this is great work. I can't believe we've come out with this approach. I think it's just phenomenal.
Yeah. Victor and Karen, as we've been talking, do you think there's anything, the next step of this obviously is the three of us have got to get our heads together and translate this into a plan. What are we missing as far as direction, do you think, or what would be helpful before we end this meeting and move into that stage? Victor, when are we coming back to the full council? Is it May 5th? Or May?
Supposed to be April 5th.
April 5th, oh gosh.
We may want to talk about that. Well, and if we're taking a different approach where we're not necessarily requiring an application, it could go to, I think the next one is April 19th, to give us some more time to kind of discuss this and then really come back with a more comprehensive recommendation to the full council.
Yeah.
I would
Not
add,
the staff reports is due next Friday.
yeah, I think, the 2 weeks or 4 weeks, is if it can be thoughtful and well designed, it's worth the wait.
Yeah.
No
That would
rush.
still give us enough time to get everything in before the new fiscal year.
Great.
Good work.
Thank you. This was a great, very great session of just being able to think freely and talk freely. And you don't often get to do that in a public setting, but it worked out today.
Yes, it did. And thank you, Chrislyn, for your input.
Yeah.
Kristen is
still
always
there.
part of the team. You know, it may not always be official, but she is always there.
I know.
We just have to ride the wave here with the work we've been doing, with El Centro and the Coast House. We just need to, build on this, capture the momentum.
Absolutely.
Thanks to everybody.
Okay.
Thank
Are we
you.
good, Madam Mayor?
I think we're good to adjourn.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Recordings